You ever get that feeling like you stumble on something and it just
Oh.
feels, I don't know, like there's a hidden history just lurking, a secret world right under our noses?
Oh, yeah, that feeling of a story behind the official story. It's definitely compelling.
It really is.
Ah,
And it's kind of where we're going today. We're diving into the fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty head-scratching idea of the Tartarian Empire.
right, Tartaria. It's a name that's been popping up a lot online, sparking tons of discussion.
No kidding. And for this deep dive, you shared a really helpful source, the Wikipedia page on the Tartarian Empire.
Yeah, it gives a good overview, it lays out what the theory actually suggests and some of the history around it.
So our mission today really is to try and get past the hype, understand what this Tartarian Empire thing is. Like, where did it come from? Why does it grab people's attention so much? Let's try and cut through the noise.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so first things first, the name itself, Tartary. What does that actually mean historically?
Okay, so historically, Tartary wasn't an empire. It was basically a geographical label, kind of vague, but it pointed to this huge area in Central Asia and Siberia.
Like on old maps.
Exactly. You look at maps from, say, the 1700s. The Wikipedia page mentions one specifically, and you'll see Great Tartary. And it's often divided up, into Muscovite Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Independent Tartary.
So it was a known place, geographically
A
speaking.
known, if very broadly defined, region, yes.
But the Tartarian Empire theory, that's something else entirely, isn't it?
Oh, completely, yeah. The theory basically takes that name and spins it into this idea of a lost global civilization. Highly advanced, culturally sophisticated, way beyond what mainstream history tells us.
And it ignores the actual history of the Tartar peoples.
Pretty much. As the Wikipedia page points out, it kind of glosses over the well-documented history of various groups in that region, groups who were actually called Tartars or associated with Tartary in historical accounts. This theory creates a whole different narrative.
Okay, so historical Tartary region, theoretical Tartary lost super civilization. Got it. And geographically, where would that historical region be today, roughly?
It's a massive area. The Wikipedia entry clarifies it covers territory from central Afghanistan all the way up to northern Kazakhstan, plus bits of Mongolia, China, the Russian Far East. It's huge.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So tangible place, real history. Now, where did this other idea, this lost empire thing, actually come from? What are the roots?
Well, the origins seem to trace back to Russia, actually. The Wikipedia source points to Anatoly Fomenko and his new chronology ideas back in the mid-70s, early 80s. That's kind of an early seed.
The chronology.
Yeah, basically rewriting historical timelines. And then later, Nikolai Levashov pushed these, racial occult history ideas that also fed into it within Russia.
And wasn't there a kind of nationalist angle to it early on? Something about Russia's true past?
Exactly, yeah. In those early Russian pseudoscientific circles, Tartaria was often presented as, the real historical name for Russia. The narrative was that the West had deliberately ignored or suppressed this authentic Russian history.
That's a big claim. How did actual Russian historians or institutions react?
Not well. The Russian Geographical Society, a very established group, has flat out rejected it. The Wikipedia page says they've called it an extremist fantasy.
Wow.
But interestingly, they haven't shied away from the historical term, Tartary. They've obviously used this whole thing as a chance to show off maps from their archives that do depict Tartary to sort of emphasize, look, this was a real geographical term, here's the context.
Okay, so experts debunked the fantasy but confirmed the historical term. Now, Wikipedia mentions this theory really taking off online maybe around 2016. Was that still tied to the Russian nationalist thing?
Not so much, it seems. While those Russian ideas are part of the origin story, the recent online surge has kind of detached from that specific framing. It's become more of a globalized internet phenomenon, really. It's morphed.
Okay, so it evolved. Which brings us to, what do people who believe in this online version actually claim? What are the main ideas?
Well, a huge part of it is about architecture, a completely different take on architectural history.
How say?
Proponents look at grand buildings that were demolished, like the old Singer Building or the original Penn Station in New York, or even temporary structures, like from the 1915 World's Fair in San Francisco.
Temporary buildings.
Yeah. They claim these weren't just temporary or built when we think they were. They argue they were actually remnants of this vast, ancient Tartarian empire, buildings that have been deliberately wiped from the record.
Okay, that's a leap. What other kinds of buildings get pulled into this?
Oh, lots. Those really ornate Gilded Age mansions and public buildings, often claimed as Tartarian. Even sometimes things like the Great Pyramids or the White House get looped in.
So it's a global empire with incredible building skills.
Yeah.
But does the theory explain how this massive, advanced, supposedly peaceful empire just vanished
Hmm.
and got erased?
That's definitely a weak spot. The Wikipedia entry highlights this. There isn't really a clear, consistent story for the downfall. How does a super advanced global power just collapse and get completely hidden? It's pretty vague.
Hmm. And you mentioned the article said something about technology, like free energy?
Right. That's a
Yeah.
common thread. The idea that these Tartarians had harnessed, unlimited wireless energy, they'll often point to certain design elements on old buildings like spires or domes as supposed evidence of this lost tech.
Okay. Fascinating. Now, there's another term that comes up a lot with this, the mud flood. What's the deal with that?
Ah, yes, the mud flood. That's basically the explanation offered for how the empire was destroyed or hidden. The idea is that a massive catastrophic mudslide, or maybe several, swept the globe.
A global mud flood.
Yeah. Burying the original ground floors of all these supposedly Tartarian buildings under layers of mud and silt.
And the proof for this mud flood is?
Usually it's architectural features you can see today, like basement windows that look like they were once full windows, or doors that open several feet below the current street level. They interpret these as signs of a previous lower ground level buried by mud.
Right, so things being underground is seen as evidence of this cataclysm.
Hmm.
The Wikipedia page also connects the world wars to this. How do they fit in?
Yeah, that's another layer. Within the theory, World War I and World War II are sometimes framed as part of the cover-up, like deliberate destruction campaigns to get rid of remaining Tartarian structures and evidence.
Which is kind of a dark twist on the actual destruction that did happen in those wars.
Exactly. It takes a real historical tragedy, the bombing of cities and destruction of heritage, and reinterprets it through this conspiratorial lens.
Okay, so beyond the mud flood and the wars,
Hmm.
are there other, maybe more general observations used to back up the Tartarian Empire idea?
Yeah, the Wikipedia page mentions a few other common points. One is noticing similarities in architectural styles across the world. Think about state capitol buildings, so many have similar domes. Or the existence of star forts. Those geometric fortifications, you find them in lots of different countries.
And the theory says this isn't just coincidence or shared influences, it's proof of one global Tartarian standard.
Essentially, yes, that these similarities point to a single, forgotten global builder culture.
What else? Anything about old photos?
Yes, that's another big one. People point to photos from the late 1800s or early 1900s showing major cities like London or New York, but the streets look weirdly empty, deserted almost.
And that's interpreted as evidence of depopulation.
Right. Evidence that maybe some catastrophe happened or that the populations weren't as large as we're told and that the official history is hiding something about why those streets look so empty.
And the article mentioned one more thing about those photos, a contrast.
Yeah, the contrast you sometimes see between the incredibly elaborate monumental architecture in the photos and then like horse-drawn carts and muddy streets right next to it.
Like the tech levels don't match.
Yeah. Exactly. That visual disconnect, which, you can still see today with skyscrapers next to slums, is used to argue that the people shown in the photos couldn't possibly have built those grand structures, that the buildings must belong to an earlier, more advanced civilization, like the Tartarians.
It's definitely a unique way of looking at things. Okay, so that's the theory and its evidence. How have other people, analysts or critics, interpreted this whole phenomenon?
The Wikipedia page gives some good perspectives. Zach Mortis, writing for Bloomberg, he had an interesting take. He suggested the whole thing reflects a kind of dissatisfaction with modern architecture,
Okay.
and a sort of romanticization of older styles.
Okay, an aesthetic preference driving it.
Partly, yeah. He actually called it the QAnon of architecture.
Whoa. Why that comparison?
Implying it works similarly, finding hidden codes and conspiracies in plain sight, in this case, in buildings rather than political events. It taps into that same pattern-seeking drive, maybe.
Interesting. Any other interpretations mentioned?
There's Moritz Mehrer, a researcher who studies religion. He links the Tartarian stuff to other online theories, like the one about giant ancient trees that turned into mesas.
Giant trees.
Yeah, another visual-heavy theory. And Moore argues that the reason the Tartarian narrative is often so fragmented or unclear is because it spreads mainly through images on social media, like meme culture. He also draws that parallel to QAnon, pointing to how it's decentralized and very visually driven.
So the critics are saying it's maybe less about actual history, is more about modern anxieties, how we feel about the past. and just how ideas spread online these days.
That seems to be a major part of the critique, yeah. It's fulfilling some kind of need or reflecting certain cultural currents.
Gotcha. Now, just quickly before we wrap up, Wikipedia listed a few related concepts. Anything jump out there?
Yeah, it was just a brief list, things like ancient astronauts, which obviously deals with rewriting the past with advanced beings, anti-Normanism, another Russian-focused pseudo-history about origins. It mentioned Chinese Tartary, again, reinforcing the historical term, and Hyperborea, that mythical land from Greek legends.
So, connections to a whole ecosystem of alternative histories and myths.
Right, it shows it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It taps into similar themes found elsewhere.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together then. We've covered a lot of ground, some of it pretty strange.
We definitely have. We started with the key difference. Tartary, the historical geographical place, versus Tartarian Empire, the conspiracy theory about a lost super civilization.
Right, and we looked at where that theory came from, those Russian roots, initially quite nationalistic.
And then how it kind of morphed and exploded online more recently, becoming this global internet thing detached from the original context.
We dug into the main claims, the whole rewriting of architectural history, pointing to demolished buildings, Gilded Age structures.
The mud flood as the explanation for destruction and burial, the idea of suppressed free energy tech.
And the evidence they use, like similar building styles worldwide, those empty-looking old city photos, the contrast between architecture and transport.
Yeah, all those visual anomalies they focus on.
And then we touched on the critical views, seeing it as a reflection of discontent with modernity, maybe an architectural QAnon, fueled by image-based online culture.
And all this, like we said, drawn from that Wikipedia overview you shared, which does a pretty good job laying out the different facets.
It really does. It shows how a real historical name can just be, well, taken and run with in a completely different direction.
Absolutely. Building this whole unsupported narrative on top of it.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. What is it about us, humans, that makes us so drawn to these hidden histories, these alternative explanations for the world?
What needs are these theories meeting? Whether it's Tartaria or something else.
Exactly. And what does it say about how we look at the past? And maybe even how we see, I don't know, the buildings we walk past every single day. Something to chew on, definitely.